האם ארצות הברית היא באמת בת ברית או סכנה לעם ישראל? פרנסיסקו גיל-ווייט מגיע הערב בכדי לפרק את הנרטיב המהונדס שמכרו לכם במדיה. נשתמש בדוגמאות מן ההיסטוריה כדי להבין מי הם הבוסים הגדולים ודרכי הפעולה שלהם, ננסה להבין מה באמת הסיפור עם איראן ולאן כל זה הולך, ונחשוף איך הם מנהלים הצגה שבה הביטחון שלכם הוא לא יותר ממהלך הלוח השחמט שלהם. צפו בראיון, תירשמו לערוץ, שימו לייק ושתפו בבקשה. So welcome back to the last pillar. We are joined once again by Francisco Gil-White. Francisco is a renowned evolutionary anthropologist, historian, and investigative journalist. As the founder of Management of Reality, he continues to be one of the most vital voices, helping us to dismantle the engineered narratives of our time. So Francisco, allow me to thank you, and it's absolutely great to have you back. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Harry. It's always a pleasure to speak to Israeli audiences, and I hope that we can make these topics more widely known.
Absolutely. Let's do it. So the first thing that I would like to do with your kind help is to understand the nature of the beast, to understand the psychology of those psychopaths whom you consider to be the big bosses. And in your amazing articles in the Substack that you have, you spoke about the incredible revolutions in 1848, and you spoke about the counter-revolution as explained, for example, by Maurice Joly. And I think it will make people understand who we are dealing with and eventually connect it to the situation here in our area. And maybe you can also speak a little bit about eugenics as part of this insanity. And please take your time about that, because this is the framework.
That is the framework. That's right. I think the fact that you want to start with 1848 tells me that you've really grasped sort of the main structure of the model. And that makes me very happy. So why is 1848 such an important date to ground yourself in? That's because there's a very strong argument that 1848 is the year that really launched the modern world, the modern Western world as we understand it culturally and politically. Why is that? Because in 1848, the most remarkable political event in the history of the West happened, or at least that's my opinion, right?
Yes.
Why do I think this is the most remarkable political event? Because in 1848, all of the peoples of the West rose in revolution at the same time. We can't really imagine anything like that. We have nothing to compare it to. This is the original spring. You know how everybody talks about the Arab Spring and the Czech Spring and the this spring, the that spring. The reason they use the term spring is because 1848 was nicknamed the European Spring, or the spring of the European peoples, because the modern Western world was born in 1848. That's our spring. That's when democracy sprang forth and germinated in the West. Now, people might argue with this and say, no. What about the French Revolution of 1789? And of course, the French Revolution was very, very important. And it is also true that without the French Revolution of 1789, you won't have 1848. Of course, you need the French Revolution for even the possibility of 1848 to happen. That's definitely true. But it's also true that the modern world was not quite launched by the French Revolution, because although the French Revolution was very influential, it was defeated. Okay, it was defeated. All of Europe, all of the absolutist monarchies of Europe banded together to fight against the French Revolution. And then that produced the unfortunate transition into the terror, because what happened inside France, when all of Europe attacked France, all of these monarchies, all of these aristocrats all over Europe, and they were allied with the French king, right? This is why the French king lost his head, because it was discovered that he and Marie Antoinette were conspiring with the aristocracies, with the monarchies all over Europe to defeat the revolution. So when this war against all of Europe happened, paranoia really took over inside France, and the terrorists, because there was always a terrorist theory of the revolution that was defended by a very small minority that nobody was listening to and that had zero prestige. And what those people had said from the very beginning was that the only way for the revolution to succeed was to kill all of the aristocrats. Okay, and if almost everybody thought these people are crazy. That's nonsense. We don't have to produce any such bloodbath to achieve the social and political change that we want. That's insane. And almost nobody listened to these few crazies, right? But when all of Europe attacked France and the king, whom the revolutionaries wanted to preserve, you see, this is the thing. The revolutionaries in France wanted to preserve Louis XVI. They wanted to preserve the monarchy. They wanted a constitutional monarchy. Basically, they wanted to copy, they wanted to grab something that was evolved from the British example. That's what they were all talking about. So they wanted to preserve the king. Nobody wanted to cut the king's head off, except for this very, very, very tiny group that nobody was listening to. Mm-hmm. When the king was found to be conspiring with the aristocrats and kings all over Europe, and Europe attacked France, then the terrorists started becoming more and more prestigious. They started saying, see what we told you. We told you that you couldn't trust these aristocrats. You had to kill them all if you wanted the revolution to survive. And now look, we're going to lose the revolution in a counter-revolution launched by the monarchies of Europe, allied with many of our own aristocrats, right? Yes. And that, as the situation became more and more difficult, and the revolution became more and more threatened, both from within and from without, paranoia won the day, and the terrorists. Remember, the Pope was also allied with all of this. The Pope was allied with the King of France and the enemies of the revolution, in the monarchies and so forth. So the paranoia just really took over, and then the terrorists ended up in power, and you had 2 years of terror. And then Napoleon displaces that governing group, stabilizes France, reconciles with the church, right, and sort of and saves the revolution for a little while, right? Because Napoleon won all of his wars with the European powers. For a while, Napoleon won everything. And he creates a new French empire and exports all of the, so the principles and values of the French Revolution. He exports them all over Europe, and this is what made the French Revolution so important. It's that it moved the Overton window, right? It made the modern world imaginable for everybody because Napoleon conquered Europe, and everywhere that Napoleon went, he freed the Jews from the ghettos, mm-hmm. because slavery was completely incompatible with the Republican, with the revolutionary value system. Yes, and the Jews were slaves in the ghettos. So that's out. There's no distinction between Christian and Jews. They're all citizens of the same republic. And everywhere he went, he established the Napoleonic Code, right? And so all of that was very influential. And then, of course, Napoleon was finally defeated by the absolutist monarchies, right? Mm-hmm. And with the help of the British, right, who didn't want the French Revolution either. And after the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, you have a period where the aristocracies of Europe, the victorious aristocracies of Europe, believed that they would be able to kick Westerners back into the Middle Ages. They really thought this was possible. And so after 1815, there's a long period of repression, led by an alliance, led by Metternich, the Austrian ruler, and who led an alliance of Austria-Hungary, Prussia, and Russia, which were the three sort of most absolutist, most totalitarian, regressive states in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout this period, there was a lot of repression. There were some movements that tried to fight this, but they were put down with great violence. But they were all sitting on a powder keg, and that powder keg was going to blow, because people remembered the French Revolution, and it blew in 1848. It blew in 1848. All of the peoples of Europe rose at the same time. This began in Sicily. It went up the boot of Italy, you know, like the what do you call this thing? The fuse of a bomb, right? It went up the boot of Italy, and then when it got to Paris, and Paris blew, all of Europe blew. And
except for England, right? Except for England, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Because they already had the reforms there in 1831, I think.
That's right. So in Britain, they had some reforms that had sort of helped release some political steam, because they were getting pressure too. But the reforms had released some steam, and they had convinced people in Great Britain that if they kept pushing, they could make the system more democratic without violence. So the more moderate response of the British aristocrats to popular pressure, which was very practical, they were very practical about it. When they got really scared that there was going to be violence, they made small changes and allowed people to have a little bit more. You know, they started giving the vote first to the middle classes, you know, and then to people who didn't have property but weren't quite, you know, middle class and so forth. They did it gradually by stages, and so people were sort of confident that they didn't have to have a civil war, and that's why they avoided revolution in 1848. But everywhere else, the other place that was spared in 1848 was the Russian Empire, because their repression was so complete that it was really very difficult for people to rise at that time. But everywhere else, you had these revolutions going on all at the same time, and they were all demanding what we now consider to be, you know, the obvious set of things that make up the modern Western world. They wanted constitutions, bills of rights, suffrage. They wanted, you know, equality, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, divided government, blah, 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 all of these things, you know, parliaments. They didn't get it all at once. But what did happen was that 1848 was so violent and so widespread, and people were so determined, that the aristocrats all over Europe thought they were going to lose their heads. So they decided to copy the British, and they opened up the valve and let some steam, and they created parliaments, and they created constitutions, bills of rights, blah, blah, blah. And then when they got their sea legs back, they fought back, and some of those gains were partially abolished. But what had changed completely in 1848 was the political grammar. From 1848 onwards, in order to stay in power, the aristocracies had to change the way they speak. And from this point forward, they had to say that they were in the service of the people, that they were trying to solve the problem of poverty, that they were in favor of liberty, and blah, blah, blah. They had to start speaking the language of modern liberalism in order to stay in power. And that grammatical change, that transformation of the political grammar, is what put the West on the slope towards more and more liberty, more and more political participation, you know, more until we built modern democracies. It was a gradual process. There was still some violence after that, but the slope was seemingly irreversible. There was nothing the aristocrats could do to stop popular pressure after 1848 to produce this increasing liberalism all over the West. So that's why 1848 is so important.
I see. But it seems like they spoke the language, I mean, the words, the vocabulary, but their dictionary was a little different. Like you say, it's political grammar. And in 48, eventually, Bonaparte III, Louis, right, rose to power, and he became the study case of Maurice Joly. And he wrote the book about conversation in hell between Montesquieu and Machiavelli. Dialogue, apologies. And he is basically describing the clandestine way in which the aristocrats, the psychopaths, were able to take control again. So maybe you can describe that. I think it's very important to understand what we are dealing with today.
Yes, very good. So you're right. So 1848. So what we were just saying is that the aristocracies all over Europe learned to speak in a different way because they understood that if they didn't do that, they would lose power, okay, and perhaps their lives, right? Yeah. So they started speaking in this new way. But the question you raise is, well, was this new way of speaking an honest way of speaking, or was it hypocritical, right? And well, I mean, you can guess that it was hypocritical because they did it to stay in power. I mean, I'm sure that one or two aristocrats here or there really did have a change in consciousness. That happened too, of course. There were such people. But the people that were really in control were mostly putting on a show. And as you say, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte is the sort of the emblematic case, right? Because what happened after 1848 is that there was the monarchy that had been ruling France abdicated, and elections were held in France for a president to create the French Second Republic. Now, there was an experiment tried out here that had never been tried out before anywhere, which was universal suffrage of all males, okay, without an economic requirement. Just all adult males can vote, all right? This was completely radical. This had never been done anywhere. And what that election did is it elected Louis Napoleon Bonaparte to become the new president of France. Now, who was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte? He was the nephew of the famous Napoleon Bonaparte, okay, who exported revolutionary culture all over Western Europe. Now, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, he talked like a good revolutionary. Okay, so he was careful to speak in a way that reminded people of Napoleon, his uncle, and of the revolution. And he did that consistently throughout the period 1815 to 1848. So during that period, he kept writing and claiming that he was the rightful heir to the French throne, you know, to the imperial throne of France, because he was the only male, the only living male in a line from Napoleon, not exactly from Napoleon, but he was a nephew. So, and while he did this, however, while he claimed to have a royal pedigree or imperial pedigree to take the French throne, at the same time, however, he would defend ideas that were entirely revolutionary and you know, pro-worker, almost socialist, talking about how to fix the problems of poverty and how to enfranchise the lower classes politically and all this stuff. It was like proto-socialist, and that made him very popular in France. This kind of stuff made, and also, of course, the mystique of his name made him a powerful candidate. And so in 1849, the French citizens elect him president, but they didn't really get the revolutionary Democrat that they thought they were getting. So, and this is where Maurice Joly comes in, because Maurice Joly is he was a lawyer by profession, but he was a natural political scientist by inclination. And what Joly did is he observed his time and realized that even as democracy was being born in the French Second Republic, it was being killed. All right, the democracy was in fact still born. And this is what Maurice Joly tried to explain to the French public. So he wrote this book that you mentioned, Dialogue in Hell, between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, to try to explain to people what had happened. And his main argument was, I'll explain what the book is in a second, but his main argument was, if you allow the new democratic government to create a secret service, a clandestine service that can spend the money of the citizens in secret, you will destroy democracy. Because the people running the government will, of course, use that secret service, which doesn't have to explain what it's doing, right? That's why it's secret. They will use that secret service to corrupt the system and secure their own power. Obviously, that's what they're going to do with it. So Joly tried to explain that this institutional structure, where you're trying to produce, checks and balances, so that the different branches of government can act as counterweights to each other, and none of them becomes too powerful by itself, thereby safeguarding the rights and the liberties of people as Montesquieu wanted, right? This is the system that Montesquieu tried to convince us would safeguard our modern liberties, right? It says you have to divide government and you have to balance the powers, right? What Joly was trying to explain is, look, all of that institutional creativity and all of that structure, it's not going to do it if you include an institution that can spend citizen monies in secret. Because if a secret institution is created that can spend our money like that, well, then all of the other pieces and branches of government are going to be corrupted by the clandestine service. Absolutely. And then it doesn't matter what your design is. It's not going to work. The bureaucrats are going to secretly control all the branches of government. Now, how did he communicate this argument? Because this is what I call the argument of a counterfeit democracy, right? Mm-hmm. Because what Joly is saying is, if the clandestine service can act with impunity in secret and thereby corrupt the various institutions of the citizens, what you're going to get is a facade of a democracy. The secret service is, of course, going to be clever enough not to reveal what it's doing, right? And so it will clandestinely control everything, but will keep the appearance of independence for all of the different institutions that it controls, so that the citizens will never be offended. And in that way, they won't rise again in revolution to remove the bosses from power. This is the idea that Joly is trying to explain. And so the way he communicates this is by setting up a dialogue between Montesquieu and Machiavelli. So Montesquieu and Machiavelli are both dead. In his, it's like a novel. It's like a Platonic dialogue, more or less. And so they're both dead, and they're bored because they have nothing to do. They're in hell waiting for the final judgment. Nothing's happening. And so they run into each other, and they decide that to pass the time, they'll talk politics, which they both love, right? So Montesquieu says to Machiavelli, "Oh, Machiavelli, you really need to get acquainted with what's been happening politically in the West since you died, because it's unbelievable. I mean, they had these revolutions, and then they created these new democratic systems, and they separated the powers, like I told them, to get the checks and balances, and now it's all solved. We've arrived. They've created institutional articulations that will now protect liberty and human rights forever, and there's no way that this can be dismantled now because of the way they set it up." So Machiavelli listens to him and he says, and he says, well, I'm sorry to tell you that it's all for nothing, and it's not going to work. And Montesquieu says, what? Why not? He says, well, I'll tell you. And the rest of the book is Machiavelli making fun of Montesquieu, explaining to Montesquieu why it's not going to work, because the citizens have allowed the government to create a clandestine service. Okay? Mm-hmm. And he goes one by one, he names all the institutions that are going to be corrupted, right? So he says, you know, they're going to corrupt the political parties and the associations and and it's all going to be owned by the same clandestine center. So there's going to be a monarchist party, and there's going to be a libertarian party, and there's going to be a communist party, and there's going to be a liberal party and a aristocratic party. There's going to be all kinds of things, and they're going to have their different branding, and they're going to seem like they're all enemies of each other, but in secret, the clandestine service is going to be controlling all of them through its own agents, right? And people won't understand any of that, and it'll seem like the parties are attacking the government, but they're always going to be attacking it in things that don't matter, or else they will be pressuring the government in ways that seem like attacks, but in fact, what they're asking for, what they're demanding, is precisely the thing that the government already wants to do, right? So the government is setting up a simulation so that it will seem like it is, you know, bending under pressure, you know, caving in to the demands of the populace, when in reality it's just doing whatever it wanted to do from the beginning, just pretending to drag its feet, and then itself creating the phony popular pressure that will you know subjugate it. You know, this is the narrative that is created for the citizens, so that they will think that they're living inside a free system. So he explains all that.
Can you give an example, for example, how they use the media, and then from that people will be able to...
I was going to go to that. So as he explains all this, Montesquieu gets more and more scared, right? Listening to Machiavelli's arguments, because Machiavelli's arguments are very logical. I mean, it's very difficult to get out of what Machiavelli is explaining. So Montesquieu starts getting very worried, but then he says, well, what you're describing is all very frightening, but I have an ace up my sleeve, he says, because even though you can corrupt all of those institutions, he says, there is a free press now, and the free press can investigate what you're doing, and they will expose the clandestine corruption of the institutions, and then all of this clandestine corruption will fall apart because the public will be informed, right? And so Montesquieu says, well, I mean, I agree that you've put your finger on the most critical aspect of the system, that he always calls the phony Democrat, he calls him the prince, right? So he says, you've put your finger on the most difficult aspect, the most difficult problem that the prince has to solve, but this is by no means an insurmountable problem. What the clandestine service will do with the money of the citizens is produce thousands of new newspapers. You know, it'll create all kinds of new media that will seem like private media, and in fact will attack the government. They will viciously attack the government, but they will all be controlled by the government, and they will, like I said, the parties would do, they will do the same thing. They'll attack the government in order to create narratives so that the government will then seem to be following the wishes of the people, when in fact it will always be doing what the bureaucrats running the government already wanted to do. And it'll be the same thing. There will be a monarchist newspaper, a liberal newspaper, a communist newspaper, blah, blah, blah. They will all be controlled by the clandestine service. And of course, any newspapers that are not controlled by the clandestine service can try to control. They can try to go corrupt them. This can be done. And then he also talks about the universities, because he talks about the generation of books. He says, we're going to invent laws that will make it very difficult, very expensive to produce short books. We will force everybody to write very long books because of the way we're going to structure the tax system. And so academics will only be able to publish very, very long books, and they won't be able to do any kind of propaganda to explain anything to people because nobody will want to read their very large works. I don't know. This is so now, and he explains many different strategies, very specific strategies. Now, the most important thing to understand about all this is that this simulated democracy through the clandestine service is not a fiction. In other words, Maurice Joly was not imagining what might happen. He wrote it as a work of fiction, this is true, but what he was in fact doing was to describe what Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was already doing with his own secret police in France, okay? And Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's secret police was such a large, such a gigantic octopus, penetrating all aspects of French society, that historians of what Louis Napoleon Bonaparte did consider him a precursor of modern totalitarianism. Mm-hmm. Okay, so so modern totalitarianism was invented in the first democracy. You see, yeah. We were doomed from the start, and that was Maurice Joly's very argument. He was the modern democracy is being born with an original sin. There is an institution that should have never been created because it makes the entire institutional design of democracy obsolete. It makes it unworkable. And this is why when I talk about this, I always say that if Westerners survive the present crisis, which I hope we will, but if we survive it, then the first thing that we have to do in our new constitutions, the very first article of our new constitutions needs to read, never can any government create an institution that will spend the money of the citizens without being fully audited by the citizens. There can be no secret service. Then there can be no clandestine service. Not one penny of the citizens that the government spends can be unknown to the citizens.
Yes. I would like my audience to think about the 5I, for example, as reference to what you're describing. And I would like to remind the audience also that Bonaparte eventually became an emperor again in 1852, while he was doing all those things, and he threw Joly to jail for 15 months because he nailed him with this book.
That's right. So Joly was trying to avoid Louis Napoleon's secret police. And that's why he presented his work as a work of fiction, right? Instead of saying this is Louis Napoleon, he also published it anonymously. He didn't sign his name to it, and he published it in Belgium, hoping that would make a difference. But of course, Louis Napoleon's police knew exactly who he was talking about. It was obvious that he was talking about Louis Napoleon. They also knew perfectly well who the author was, and they knew where he was. So they nabbed him when he was trying to bring some copies of his book from Belgium into France. They grabbed him. They confiscated all the copies of his book. Nobody read it. Nobody knew it existed. They threw him in prison, like you said, because Louis Napoleon couldn't afford Maurice Joly explaining the system, right? He couldn't afford that. So he grabs him, puts him in jail, confiscates everything. But then after a few years, Louis Napoleon let him out. He let him out because he knew that Maurice Joly couldn't do anything to him. By then, Louis Napoleon controlled the entire meaning system, the entire reality management system. And therefore, he could afford to let Maurice Joly out of prison. That's how tremendous the reality management power of Louis Napoleon became.
Yeah. Well, thanks to your explanation, we now have a glimpse into the minds of the people who are capable of creating, a book like The Prince. And I would like to move forward and to connect that the poor people who actually went to revolutionize Europe in 1848, one of the struggles was extreme poverty, of course. And eventually the same aristocrats came to a solution, and that's the eugenic movement, solving the root problem of poverty in a very vicious way. Maybe you can explain a little.
Well, eugenics was not really sold as a solution to the problem of poverty. Eugenics was sold as what you would have to call it a public health intervention. Okay, it was a public health intervention to save society from mental retardation. That is how it was publicly sold. It was sold as public health to save the West from mental retardation. Mm-hmm. They were not trying to solve poverty. And they were not claiming to. What they were saying was that
no, they just wanted to get rid of the poor and using the veneer of public health.
Well, but they didn't want to get rid of the poor. They wanted to destroy the political participation of the poor. So the way it worked was that they claimed that poverty was a consequence of mental retardation. Okay, so poor people were poor because they were stupid. This is what the eugenicists were claiming. And they were stupid, they were mentally retarded or feeble-minded, that's the term that they used at the time, feeble-minded, because they had bad genes. And they had bad genes, according to the eugenicists, because they were not German. That's the entire eugenic theory. Now, let me answer first the question I'm always asked, which is, what does German have to do with anything? Mm-hmm. Because the people leading the eugenics movement were in fact not in Germany.
England and the U.S. especially.
That's right. They were not for the whole first half of the 20th century, and even before the second half of the 19th century. For that whole period, the great leaders of the eugenics movement were in Great Britain and in the United States. And they were the leaders of the eugenics movement internationally. Eugenics first appears in the head of Francis Galton in just a few years after 1848, right? I explain it as a reaction to 1848. I think it's very obvious. So, and Francis Galton was not German. He was British, and then the great financiers of eugenics were the American fortunes of the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Harrimans, Fords, the Watson from IBM, all these people. So why was the idea that German is better, that German genes are smarter? Why was that so exciting to the leaders of the eugenics movement in Great Britain and the United States? People always ask me this. So let me get that out of the way, because it'll be less surprising than people think. When we learn the history of the West, it is not usually emphasized that the West became German. So, I mean, it's there. It's not like it's suppressed or anything, but it's no special point of this is made, and perhaps it should be, because it helps us explain everything that happened in the 20th century. What happened in the history of the West is that towards the year approaching the year 500, the political structure of the Latin Roman Empire, of the Western Roman Empire, began to fray, and these Germanic military aristocracies that had been pushing against the Roman Empire, in the later stages, actually began merging with the Roman aristocracy and became defenders of the frontiers of the Roman Empire, so that when the when the political structure of the Roman Empire begins to fray towards the year 500, this transition was already happening, and what ended up taking place is that the Roman Empire was broken up into pieces, and those pieces were all governed by Germans. Okay, so you have the Visigoths in the Iberian Peninsula, right? Goth means German, so you have the Visigoths. Then you have the Ostrogoths and the Lombards in the north of Italy. That's right, in the north of Italy. Those are both Germanic groups. Then you have a bunch of other. You have Burgundians and blah 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 in France, but the dominant group in France becomes the Franks, hence the name France. But the territory they ended up dominating was bigger. The Franks ended up governing, all of what is now France, and then most of Germany and the Low Countries. Right, that's the Franks. Another German group,
of course.
And then, of course, you have the Angles and the Saxons, which fused into the Anglo-Saxons that ended up ruling Great Britain, and also the Normans, because the Normans were in the north of France, Normandy, and there was a Norman invasion of Great Britain that merged the Norman aristocracy with the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. And then there was, since the Middle Ages, there had been a lot of mixing with Danes as well. So, and the Danes, of course, are another Germanic group, and the other Scandinavian countries are also Germanic. So you have all of Western Europe ended up ruled by Germanic speaking aristocracies. Okay.
Yeah.
And then Charlemagne, who was king of the Franks, he conquered such a big chunk of Europe that towards the year 800. By this time, the Germanic aristocracies had been converting to Catholicism. So in the year 800, when Charlemagne conquered, or Carolus conquers this gigantic piece of what had been the Latin or Western Roman Empire, Pope Leo III thinks to himself, this is the moment to recreate the Roman Empire. So he goes and he crowns Charlemagne the new Holy Roman Empire, and at that moment is born the Germanic Holy Roman Empire of the Middle Ages. All right,
yeah,
and that's why the art that you see all over Europe from these times is called Gothic, because it's the art of the Germans. That's Gothic art, right? Yes. Anyway, so all of the aristocracies in Europe are Germanic. Many of the landed estates had their origin with Charlemagne's conquest, because what he did after his conquest is that he gave landed titles to the allies that had helped him conquer all of Europe. So one of his friends and allies became the Marquis of something over here, and another one became the Earl of whatever, and the Count of or Baron of something or the other, and so Europe becomes a patchwork of landed estates, all governed by Germanic aristocrats. Okay, so why is this important to the story of eugenics? Because when we say that eugenics as a theory of Germanic biological superiority became very exciting to the people running Great Britain and the United States, who became the great leaders of eugenics, once you understand this story that I just summarized, there's nothing to be awed by here. It's entirely normal. The people running Great Britain and the United States think of themselves as Anglo-Saxons because that's where they come from, and they have also Norman and Danish blood, and that's all Germanic blood. And so the idea that Germanic blood is superior was very appealing to them. And part of the theory that these Anglo-Saxon eugenicists developed was the idea that within the Germanic peoples, the Anglo-Saxons were supposedly the best and the most pure, blah, blah, blah. So they loved it. And they made that theory popular all over the Western upper classes, right? Because all of the Western upper classes, they never forgot that they come from Germanic roots, even though some of them stopped speaking Germanic languages, right? So in Spain, they stopped speaking German, they speak Spanish. In France, they speak French. But it doesn't matter. They remember that they come from Germanic stock, right? So this eugenic idea that said that the upper classes were rich and powerful because supposedly because they were smart, right? And they were smart because they were Germanic. That was very appealing to them. And the other thing that they did in this eugenic theory is, at this time, from the late 19th century forwards, and even somewhat before that, science had become the new religion of the West. So science had tremendous prestige. So what these eugenicists did is they created a pseudoscience in which they had these pseudoscientific ways of pretending to diagnose somebody's intelligence so that they could perpetrate this pseudoscientific scientific fraud on the population and pretend that they were diagnosing the lower classes as objectively mentally retarded. And for that, they used these IQ tests, which people are still using, and they would ask people in these IQ tests stuff that the aristocrats learn just by being members of their own aristocratic culture. So, for example, they would ask people in the early 20th century, American eugenicists in their IQ test, they would ask people the rules of tennis. Mm-hmm. So it's an IQ test where you have to know what the rules of tennis are.
But only the rich are playing tennis, right?
Only the rich were playing tennis in the early 20th century. It was a sport. The sport was invented by British aristocrats, right? And you needed to have a tennis court. There were no public tennis courts. So and people, working class people, didn't go to clubs, So of course, if they ask you the rules of tennis and you're an aristocrat, you'll know them all. And if you're a working class person, you won't know any of them. And that was supposed to be diagnosing your intelligence. You see, this is what they did. They pretended this was a science. The reason they needed to pretend this was a science was that in the post-revolutionary world of modern Western democracy, the government has to justify policy on the basis of some science. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yes. So because this was the new political grammar, they had to have a pseudoscience where they pretended to diagnose people objectively with mental retardation, so that the government could then say, well, we have to remove political rights from these people. I mean, we can't let mentally retarded people vote. But that doesn't make any sense. We can't let mentally retarded people reproduce. You see, this is what they were saying. So in diagnosing the working classes as supposedly mentally retarded, they were creating a pseudoscientific argument to destroy democracy. Wow. This was the entire point of eugenics.
Unbelievable. So they actually destroyed the ability of about 60,000 people to reproduce in the States alone, and it was legal in 30 different states.
Right? In the United States, the numbers go up into the hundreds of thousands, according to the research done by Edwin Black, who is the greatest historian of the eugenics movement. Mm-hmm. Edwin Black, in his book War Against the Weak, writes that hundreds of thousands of people were either incarcerated until their reproductive period ended, or forcibly sterilized, or unmarried by state officials in order to prevent the reproduction of the feeble-minded, right? Hundreds of thousands of people in the lower classes were oppressed in this manner by state officials in the United States.
And nobody speaks about it. And if you go deeper, you eventually understand that the cause for World War II can be explained by the eugenic movement.
Right.
But with your permission, I will just let's give a break to this subject and go to the main dish.
Sure.
It was just very important for me to understand the state of mind of the psychopaths we are dealing with, the deep state. and all the rest of it. So now we are going to Israel, and your model, which is absolutely consistent and corresponding with reality, is demonstrating to us that we have a problem with America, and especially with this savior figure called Trump. And it seems to me, and I'm sure you can say so much about it, that we are consistently being betrayed by America. And I would like for you to try to give us all the possible examples that you can think about in an orderly way, chronologically if you can, about where you recognize the betrays, going up to the 12 Days War, which is the ultimate betray, in my opinion, because he destroyed our ability to bring down the regime, and indirectly is responsible for the 35,000 Iranians who were murdered while calling for freedom. And I would like for you to explain all of that, including the Contra Iran and everything that you can say, so we can have a database of those examples.
Okay, so what I'm hearing that you want to hear is you would like me to explain the structure of the betrayal of Israel by the U.S. bosses, and you would like me to connect this to the ideology of the U.S. bosses that we were just discussing.
Yes.
Right. So let me build the bridge from eugenics to the post-war. I'll do it very briefly. So it's very important to understand the topic of eugenics, because the eugenics movement is the movement that produced German Nazism. Okay, so the people leading the eugenics movement in Great Britain and the United States, they used their fortunes to nurture eugenics in Germany, and the eugenics movement that they nurtured in Germany became German Nazism and copied its strategies from the eugenicists, mostly the eugenicists in the United States, okay? Because the eugenicists in the United States are the ones who achieved great legal victories. In 1924, they organized a fraud in the U.S. Supreme Court in a case, a very famous case called Buck versus Bell, where they succeeded through this Supreme Court fraud in making it legal all over the United States for government officials to forcibly sterilize and or incarcerate people who were diagnosed as feeble-minded with these phony IQ tests. All right. So these were tremendous legal victories in the United States, and the German Nazi movement copied those legal precedents for Germany.
If I may, do you remember what the judge at the High Court of Law in this case said, that he is basing his argument for taking care of the reproduction health of the population? It was based on another decision that was made in 1905 in Massachusetts. Massachusetts. I can't say that. Yes, I cannot say that. And there was a forced vaccination, because there was a pandemic that happened there, and then the Court of Law decided that it's absolutely okay to force the population to be vaccinated. In the case you mentioned, he based it on that. He said, if the government can take care of the health by pushing vaccines by force, we can sterilize people if necessary for the sake of health. So I think it's also very interesting.
Wow. Thank you for contributing that detail. Oh my God!
I can give you the information, specific data about it if you want. It's even written in Wikipedia, the quotes, everything.
No. I'm not doubting it at all. I think that detail adds tremendous context, because once again they tried to sell us on the argument that they can vaccinate us against our will.
Yes,
they did it again just recently. So and these are the same eugenicists. So I find that fascinating. This is an amazing.
I found it. If I may, fantastic. I would like to read it for you. He was citing Jacobson in this place, Massachusetts, which I cannot say, the earlier Supreme Court case that upheld the government power to require compulsory smallpox vaccination in the interest of public health. In Buck v. Bell, which is the case you're talking about, the court was asked to decide whether the state of Virginia could forcibly sterilize people it deemed mentally unfit. Holmes used the analogy to
This is Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Yes.
It's important to point this out. Oliver Wendell Holmes, whom the meaning system is always telling us was a great man.
eugenicist, yeah. So he said, to justify forced sterilization, arguing that if the state can compel vaccination to protect society's health, it could also compel sterilization to protect society's genetic health. Unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so
all right, so getting back on the track.
Yes, the Germans.
Right. So no, the eugenicists right now. So
yeah, but you spoke about the connection to Germany.
Right, exactly. So these eugenicists produced German Nazism, right? The American eugenics produced German Nazism. Much of the financing came from the United States to build all of that. And as I was saying, the Nuremberg laws, Adolf Hitler's Nuremberg laws of 1935 were in fact copying American legal precedent. Now, what this means is that you don't understand the causes of World War II if you've never been taught the subject of eugenics. You can't. You can't know the causes of World War II. And therefore, if you don't know the causes of World War II, you can't understand World War II. And you also cannot understand why, at the end of World War II, the US government created its own intelligence service, what we call the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, by absorbing Adolf Hitler's intelligence service. Yeah. This is something that most people don't know. We have an article on our website to explain this. It's called "How Many Nazis Were Absorbed in the Creation of the CIA?" You can put it in your description. It'll be interesting for people to read that. Most people don't know anything about this, but it's public information and nobody disputes it. So this is research done by historian Christopher Simpson, a very important man. He published his book on this in 1988. The book is called Blowback: America's Recruitment of Nazis and Its Effects on the Cold War, I believe is the full title. And what he did is, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, which is the US transparency law that forces the government to release a bunch of documentation if people ask for it. Thanks to that law, Christopher Simpson was able to get an enormous amount of material with which he was able to establish that Reinhard Gehlen, who was the Nazi general who was directing Fremde Heer Ost, or Foreign Armies East, the intelligence infrastructure of Adolf Hitler in Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm.
To deal with the Soviets.
That's right, the Soviets and the countries of Eastern Europe, the whole thing. Yes. Mm-hmm. This Reinhard Gehlen was in U.S. custody immediately after the war. The U.S. military had him in custody, and he said to them, "Look, I buried these tanks somewhere. I know where they are, and inside these tanks is all of the information to recreate the entire intelligence infrastructure of Adolf Hitler in Eastern Europe. And I can build that back up for you if you want. I have the names of everybody. I know where they are. I know how to contact them. I can recreate this intelligence infrastructure for you if you want." And the U.S. bosses said, "Sure." Mm-hmm. And that became the CIA. This is what Christopher Simpson documented in 1988. We're talking about tens of thousands of German Nazi criminals and Nazi collaborators from other countries. People sometimes confuse this with Operation Paperclip. It's a completely different thing. Operation Paperclip was the recruitment of about 2,000 scientists to go work on rocket development in NASA mm-hmm. and this kind of stuff. But no, this is the creation of the U.S. intelligence service, the creation of the CIA.
And you're already talking about 1947, right?
This is 1947. The CIA was created with the National Security Act of 1947. And these Nazis who created the CIA were given absolute power because the National Security Law, the National Security Act, forgive me, this law allows the intelligence service, the CIA, to initiate any action it wants at any time without asking anybody. And they can postpone indefinitely any report of such activity merely by saying that the report would hurt national security, and they get to make that determination. So they can do whatever they want. And they have unlimited cash because they have access to the U.S. Treasury, which is the biggest concentration of money in all of history, and the CIA's budget is a state secret. So they can basically spend infinite amounts of money to corrupt anything they want. And something else that you should know about the National Security Act, we have a whole article to explain the law on our website, is that the National Security Act, I lost my train of thought. I was going to tell you.
You wanted to eventually to create the bridge to understand the ideology of the deep state who are made of Nazis.
I got it. The National Security Act doesn't merely authorize the CIA to corrupt the institutions of foreign countries. It compels it. In other words, that's what the CIA was created for, as explained in the National Security Act. Okay, so the National Security Act stipulates that the CIA will engage in clandestine activities to corrupt the political, media, citizen processes, financial institutions, everything of foreign countries. And it doesn't say enemy foreign countries, it says foreign countries. Okay.
And they did. I think we know about 90 different revolutions.
Of course.
Yeah.
So the clandestine service of the United States was created for this. Look, the biggest part of the budget of the CIA is the clandestine service. In other words, the part of the CIA that is engaged in coups and paramilitary actions and corruption of institutions and all of that. That's the clandestine service. That's the biggest chunk of the budget. This is what the CIA is for. Okay, it is for corrupting other societies. Okay, undermining and corrupting other societies. That's what it's for. That's legal. It's legal under the National Security Act. But it's not only legal. That's what it's for. Okay, so of course the CIA has been corrupting political, media, financial, etc. processes in other countries. That's what they do, and they have infinite money for this. Now, who's doing this? Who's doing the corrupting? The Nazis. That's what the CIA is. The CIA was created by absorbing Nazi intelligence. So what would Nazi intelligence do when given access to the greatest concentration of money in history and the power to act in secret with impunity? What would they do? Well, once you ask the question, the answer is obvious. They will use that money and power to begin setting up the next anti-Jewish genocide. Why? Because they are German Nazis. This is what German Nazis do. And notice the CIA was created right after the Holocaust was interrupted. The Shoah ends in 1945 and the CIA is created in 1947. So these people got to work immediately. They were like, well, they stopped us now, but let's start building the next phase of this anti-Jewish genocide, because this is what we do. We're German Nazis. And that's, of course, what they began doing. So now you want me to, so this sets up, this explains why you should expect the history of the post-war to be a series of U.S. presidential betrayals of Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? Once you understand that the institution where U.S. foreign policy is made, which is the CIA, right? Once you understand that that institution is made up of Nazis, what you should expect is that U.S. foreign policy will be designed to prepare the next genocide. That's what you should expect. And in line with that prediction, the Oslo so-called peace process is a consequence of a CIA document. Okay, a CIA U.S. military document. It's a combined thing because the author of the document that produced the Oslo process was a CIA analyst. His name was Graham Fuller. But he published his study but it was Rand that published this study, and Rand is a Pentagon think tank. So it was a joint production of the CIA and the US military that generated the idea for the Oslo peace process. Okay, that was 1989 that Graham Fuller published that study. And the Oslo process, the architecture of the Oslo process they began putting that together in 1991, right after. Okay. Mm-hmm. So where did they do this? They did this at the Madrid Peace Conference of 1991. The U.S. government forced Yitzhak Shamir to go to the Madrid Peace Conference, and at that conference,
the foreign minister of that time was David Levy, but they didn't take him. They took Netanyahu. He is the one who signed.
That is correct. No, he didn't sign anything, but you're right. So at the time, Yitzhak Shamir was the prime minister, and the foreign minister was David Levy. But the undersecretary, the guy right below the foreign minister, was Benjamin Netanyahu. He was the undersecretary of foreign affairs of the Israeli government. And Yitzhak Shamir didn't really get along with David Levy, who I think didn't speak English. So he took Benjamin Netanyahu instead. And at the Madrid Peace Conference, for the first time, the representatives of the Israeli government negotiated with the PLO. This had never happened before. This broke a sacred taboo of Israeli politics. There was a taboo against any kind of dialogue with PLO Fatah, okay, with Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, and their buddies. It was completely verboten. And that's the taboo that was broken at the Madrid Peace Conference, and the functionary in charge of breaking the taboo was the highest ranking official of foreign ministry, and that was Benjamin Netanyahu. So Benjamin Netanyahu is the guy who set the Oslo ball rolling, because from the negotiations that Netanyahu began in Madrid, evolved the Oslo negotiations that led to the signature just 2 years later. So Netanyahu sets the ball rolling in 1991, and just 2 years later, they're signing Oslo 1. Okay, it was Netanyahu that got the Oslo process going. People don't understand this. Everybody thinks Netanyahu is an opponent of the Oslo process. That's just posturing. He's an actor. Netanyahu has pushed the Oslo process faster than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. And the representatives of the PLO Fatah, they came with the group of under the Jordanians, right, to that conference.
Yeah, they had a little bit of camouflage. So instead of negotiating directly with people who were card-carrying members of the PLO, they spoke to people who were not card-carrying members of the PLO, but whom the PLO had selected to speak through. So they were negotiating with the PLO, but they were pretending not to. So it's even worse. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when I talk about this, people try to defend the Israeli government. They're saying, "Oh, but they weren't really talking to the PLO." What are you talking about? They were pretending not to talk to the PLO. It's even worse. But of course they were talking to the PLO. And you can't really defend them anyway, because eventually, of course, they did talk to the PLO. So what are you defending? You know?
Yeah. So
eventually they let them in.
Okay. So now I think that we are about to, strike the nail, because if Netanyahu spoke in 91 and legitimized the process of speaking to them and breaking the taboo, we have to understand who are those Fatah PLO. And this brings us to the Mufti and back to German Nazi, right? Because he is responsible in so many ways.
Okay, but let's do that. But I just want to close the point we were on. Just close it.
Of course.
Is that the peace process is not a fluke. It is not a Democratic initiative. It is not a Republican initiative. It's an initiative of the U.S. bosses. It was cooked at the CIA. It was pushed by Daddy Bush and James Baker III, his foreign minister, and they threatened the Israelis. People who are my age or a little bit older will remember this. Bush threatened the Israelis with the loss of the loan guarantees that Israel needed to resettle Russian immigrants in Israel, and also threatened to abolish other U.S. support for Israel if Yitzhak Shamir didn't go to the Madrid peace conference. So this was the U.S. bosses acting like a mafia boss, making the Israeli prime minister go to the Madrid peace conference because they wanted to get the Oslo ball rolling. Okay, so Bush did that, but it's not Bush, it's all the U.S. presidents, because the next president, Bill Clinton, is the guy who got the signature done, and all of the presidents since have been strong supporters of the Oslo process, the entire purpose of which was to bring the PLO Fatah terrorists into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state and to become there the government of the Arabs, right? So they brought them into Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and they turned them into the government of the Arabs in those militarily strategic territories, okay? This is what the U.S. presidents did. We were emphasizing a second ago that Netanyahu played a leading role in getting this done, but we must not forget that the orchestra directors, right, the big bosses of the entire world system, those are the U.S. presidents. And although I'm not minimizing the responsibility of Israeli leaders who were involved, but it's important to understand that the people running Israel are servants of the U.S. presidents, and the U.S. presidents are the real directors of the entire process. Okay.
But the typical Israeli is going to say, what's wrong with that? We have to have two-state solutions. We have to make sure that they will be able to live and prosper and all the rest of it. And I don't think they understand the true nature and who founded this PLO Fatah. And I think it's important to speak about that a little.
Good. Let's go there now. Okay, so the peace process is bringing PLO Fatah into strategic territory of the Jewish state, militarily strategic territory. Who are they? We need to know exactly who they are, right? And when Israelis were being asked to support the Oslo process, they should have been told exactly what PLO Fatah is, right? They should have been told.
They are hiding it.
They were not told. Nobody told them that Al-Fatah, which is the controlling core of PLO Fatah, was created by Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the co-director of the German Nazi final solution together with Adolf Eichmann. So Haj Amin al-Husseini is founder, he's the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, responsible for great mass killings of Jews in British Mandate Palestine. He was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He was made Grand Mufti by the British and organized huge mass killings of Jews in British Mandate Palestine with the help of the British. And then when World War II broke out, he went first to Iraq, where he organized the Farhud, which is a pogrom against the Jews of Baghdad that ended Jewish life in Baghdad. And then he went to Italy, where I forgot to say, the biggest of his mass killings of Jews in British Mandate Palestine, which is called the Arab Revolt that went from 1936 to 1939, that was organized with weapons that Adolf Hitler sent him because they already had a relationship. Okay. Then in 1939, he goes to Iraq, organizes the Farhud.
I just want to make a small point. This murderer, actually, we have to emphasize, he's a religious mufti. He's not a secular leader. And also, he killed more Arabs during the rebel here in between 1936 and 1939.
This is true. This is true.
So he has no problem genociding his own people in order to destroy Jews.
That's right. Haj Amin al-Husseini is the one who began the tradition of the Arab Palestinian leadership of destroying their own people in order to kill Jews. Yeah. He began that tradition. And you are right.
5,000 he killed. He killed 5,000 during those
That's
3
right.
years.
He killed many, many more Arab Palestinians than Jews. And the reason he killed so many Arab Palestinians is that the Arab Palestinians could see, the ordinary Arab Palestinians, the poor, they could see that the Zionist Jews were liberating them, because the Zionist Jews were producing an economic boom in British Mandate Palestine. And thanks to that economic boom and to the purchase of land by the Jewish agency, these lower class Arabs who were slaves, they were slaves of the feudal lords, so they ended up gaining freedom, and then they could go work as employees in the Jewish farms, where they got far better treatment than they got from their former masters, the Arab feudal lords, and their lives improved dramatically. This was such a tremendous effect that Arab poor from all over the Arab world came pouring into British Mandate Palestine to enjoy the fruits of the booming economy that the Zionist Jews created. And, well, they didn't want to go out and kill Jews. It didn't make sense to them. So Haj Amin al-Husseini had to direct terrorist violence against them to force them to participate in the terrorist attacks against the Jews. And that's why he had to kill so many Arab Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. And
that's why he killed them.
Yeah, after he destroyed the Jews in Iraq, he went to Mussolini in Italy.
That's right. So, yeah, so he does the Farhud. So in 39, he goes to Iraq. He does the Farhud, destroys Jewish life in Baghdad. Then he goes to Italy, where Mussolini receives him as a head of state. Husseini was very, very prestigious. Many people thought he might become the next caliph. Mm-hmm. So he was very interesting to the Nazis, because the Nazis had a huge project to mobilize jihadism against the Western powers and against the Jews. And then, so after Rome, he goes to Berlin, where Hitler also received him as if he was some kind of head of state, with all the pomp and circumstance, and they had a very important meeting. And in that meeting, and by the way, this is all also documented in articles on our website and in my books. Mm-hmm. And in that meeting, Adolf Hitler and Husseini agreed to exterminate the Jews, to work together to exterminate the Jews in British Mandate Palestine. Now, Husseini arrived in Berlin in the fall of 1941, and then he stayed there until he stayed in Nazi occupied Europe until the end of the war. Mm-hmm. The Nazis turned him into a Nazi official. They gave him his own bureaucracy, his own agency. It was called Bureau des Gros Mufti. And they gave him a budget. And Husseini became very important in Nazi propaganda, inciting the Muslims against the Jews. One of his famous exhortations in Nazi radio was, "Kill them where you will find them. Kill them where you will find them," which is a direct quote from the Quran. And then but even worse than that, he himself recruited and trained huge SS divisions made up of Bosnian Muslims and Albanian Muslims for Heinrich Himmler. Okay, and these Muslim SS divisions that Husseini created participated in the Yugoslav chapter of the Shoah, massacring Serbs, Jews, and Roma in the former Yugoslavia. But that's not even the worst thing he did. Haj Amin al-Husseini also became the best friend of Adolf Eichmann, and together they conceived and created and administered the entire death camp system that murdered the European Jews. Whereas Adolf Eichmann is very well known, few people know about Haj Amin al-Husseini, and even fewer know about his top responsibility in the Holocaust. His responsibility, which is on the same level of Adolf Eichmann, was established by the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal after the war, with multiple converging testimonies including the testimony of Adolf Eichmann's right-hand man, Dieter Wislicenki. Okay, so it's very well established, even though several historians have tried to whitewash Husseini's responsibility. But I mean, the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal established it with eyewitness testimony of the highest order. This is something that everybody needs to understand, because what U.S. presidents did in creating the Oslo process was make sure that they could squirrel into the Jewish state, into militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state, an organization, PLO Fatah, created by the Nazi butcher of the European Jews. So PLO Fatah is the continuation of the final solution in Israel. That's what it is.
And he actually trained, if I'm not mistaken, Arafat and Abu Mazen in Egypt, right? When he founded.
That's right. That's right. So Husseini created Al-Fatah in the late 50s in Egypt, in Cairo. He became mentor to Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, and a few other young men in the late 50s. And he got Nazi training for them, because at that time, many German Nazis were arriving in Cairo to train Gamal Abdel Nasser's security services.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this was organized by the CIA. So this is also documented by Christopher Simpson, and it's part of the narrative that I'm going to explain in a book I'm about to publish. The CIA was recruiting Nasser in secret. Years later, everybody became convinced that Nasser was a Soviet puppet, but he was in fact a double agent. The Nazis at the CIA recruited him before the Soviets did, and they recruited him as a double agent. So he was working for the CIA, but he went and pretended to become a Soviet ally. It was brilliant. It was a brilliant move by the CIA. So what the CIA did at the very, very beginning is they sent some of the Reinhard Gehlen, who was running what was called the Gehlen organization, which was the biggest chunk of the CIA, from Pullach in Germany. Pullach is a suburb of Munich. Mm-hmm. He sent some of his Nazis, and principally Otto Skorzeny. Otto Skorzeny was the leader of the effort. He sent them to Cairo to train Gamal Abdel Nasser's security services, and because they were there, Husseini could take advantage of that to use them to train the founders of Al-Fatah. And what was Otto Skorzeny's specialty? It was special operations behind the lines of the enemy. That was Otto Skorzeny's special talent and expertise. And what does PLO Fatah do? That's what they do. They do terrorist activities inside enemy territory. That's what they do.
It's incredible. People, you have to understand what Francisco just told you. He basically explained that the founder of the PLO Fatah was a Nazi co-designer of the Holocaust, and he basically trained and prepared the ground for this PLO Fatah to become the state of the Palestinian in Israel. And the Americans with the CIA orchestrated that, and our leaders, so-called leaders, pushed that. So we have to realize that, and
they lied. They lied to the Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
They never explained to the Israelis what they were doing.
And the same psychopaths from the PLO Fatah trained the Iranian revolution, right? In Lebanon.
That's also true.
So now our biggest threat, Iran, was actually supported and trained by the same people that we brought here to negotiate peace with.
That's right. So this is also something that most people don't know, and that's remarkable, because it tells you how well they really can manage reality, the bosses. Because what you just mentioned, so I'm going to summarize it. What you just mentioned is that PLO Fatah armed and trained Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas, okay, the forces that fought the jihadi revolution in Iran and put Ayatollah Khomeini in power in 1979 and created the regime that vows to destroy Israel in genocide, okay, that's PLO Fatah. PLO Fatah did all that, okay? So, but all of those facts that we just summarized, that was reported in the New York Times on the front page in 1979. The New York Times explained all of this in 1979, okay? So it's remarkable that people don't know this now. It means, what does that mean? It means that they stopped talking about it. And I've documented this. I've documented that after about 1983, nobody ever mentioned in the mainstream media or in mainstream academia, nobody ever mentioned again the connection between PLO Fatah and the jihadis in Iran.
Nothing. If you remember,
It's amazing.
in our previous interview, I found a small video in YouTube where Khomeini is being asked about the actual support and armaments that he received from the Palestinians. And he didn't answer, but it was clear that he is remaining silent to the truth. Very convenient.
Right. So it was reported in the New York Times, and Arafat was interviewed about this, and he confirmed it. He confirmed it. Front page of the New York Times. Nobody knows about it now. But more importantly, nobody could remember this. Nobody could remember this in 1993. Because 1993, already in 1993, nobody could remember this. Notice how fast. So they stopped talking about it after 1983. Stopped talking about it. And 10 years later, nobody can remember it. Because
thanks
if
to
people
you, we can. Thanks to you, we can.
Well, now we can, but in 1993, nobody could remember it. And I wasn't writing about it in 1993. Nobody could remember it, and that's why Oslo was signed. Because if the Israelis could have remembered in 1993 that PLO Fatah had created Iran, it would have been impossible to sign the Oslo Accords. And the most amazing thing is that if the Israeli government had explained this to Israelis, if the people pretending to be Israeli leaders had said out loud that PLO Fatah is the creator of Iran, the Oslo process would have never happened, and all of the violence of the last decades would not have happened, because Oslo II, signed in 1995, was approved in the Israeli Knesset by one vote margin. So if it had been public, if either of these two pieces of information, that Al-Fatah was created by the author of the Shoah, or that Al-Fatah is the creator of Iran, which wants to repeat the Shoah in Israel, right? If either of those pieces of information had been made public to Israelis before the signing of the Oslo Accords, they would have never been approved, and Israel would have been saved. And the only thing the Israeli prime minister needed to do was call a live press conference to explain what PLO Fatah was. If you as Israeli prime minister convene a live press conference, you don't tell people in advance what you're going to say, but you say, I'm going to make a very important announcement about the Arab-Israeli conflict. They'll all show up, because the Arab-Israeli conflict is front page news in every country of the world, every single day, 365 days a year. So if the Israeli prime minister says, I'm convening a live press conference because I'm going to make a very important announcement about the Arab-Israeli conference, about the Arab-Israeli conflict, they will all show up and they'll all be transmitting live. You can't edit this. Mm-hmm. And all he had to do was explain what we just said. What is PLO Fatah? And he would have said, look, they're pressuring us to negotiate with PLO Fatah, to give them territory inside the Jewish state, to give them militarily strategic territory. This is never going to happen because this is what PLO Fatah is. And then he could have explained it. He could have told people where to get the documentation. so that because it's irrefutable, it's unanswerable. There's nothing the other side can do about this documentation. So he says this, he tells people where the documentation is, he shows them the New York Times front page article explaining that PLO Fatah created Iran. Oh, it's over. It's over. The entire proposal for the Oslo peace process would have been killed that second. So it is a remarkable statement about the level of treason going on in the Israeli ruling elite, that all they had to do to save the Israelis was convene a live press conference. That's all they had to do. And they didn't do that.
It's terrifying to think about it, but it's absolutely
terrifying.
True. Yeah, it's treason. Let's move forward a little bit, and now we are going to go to the main menu. Everyone is so worried about what might happen next. Before we are going to speak about Iran today and the possible war, which I doubt, and even if there will be a war, I think it will be just good for the cameras, so Trump can show how amazing he is while keeping the jihadi Iranians on the throne.
We've already seen how hard he tries to get out of it.
Yes. But before that, can you explain, for example, what it did to us during the 12 days war? Because I think the Israelis didn't notice the tricks, how we controlled the narrative and basically eliminated our ability to bring down the regime.
Well, let's explain it with a metaphor, because you're right. This is the structure. Once you understand the 12-day war, you understand the entire structure of what Trump does. If you explain it with a metaphor, let's suppose you have two guys, Aaron and Benjamin. And Aaron is beating the crap out of Benjamin. Okay? They're having a fight. And you jump in to separate them and stop the fight. Whose friend are you?
Benjamin.
Right. Because Benjamin is the guy who's getting his ass handed to him, right? He's the one who's getting the crap beaten out of him, right? So if Aaron is beating the crap out of Benjamin and you stop the fight, you're Benjamin's friend. It's very simple to understand. What was happening in the 12-day war? Israel was beating the crap out of Iran. It was so bad that Iran was unable, with its shitty Chinese and Russian equipment, unable to down even one Israeli fighter jet. Nothing. Israel was bombing Iran with impunity. If Trump was really the enemy of the Iranian Ayatollahs, all he had to do was sit tight and say nothing, do nothing. Just let the Israelis continue. That's all he had to do. It's just do nothing. But what did he do? He tried very hard to get the Iranians to say something that would help him stop the Israelis. Okay? Come back to the negotiating table. I want to stop this war, blah, blah, blah. He did this in public. When that didn't work, and he said in public that he was trying to save the Iranian empire, because Trump is not very careful sometimes when he speaks. He says the quiet part aloud. Right, so he said, he wrote in Truth Social that he was trying to save the Iranian empire. He said it. And when that didn't work, he came into the war, dropped a few bombs, and immediately said it's over, and imposed a ceasefire. Now, recent events in Iran have made it clear that Israel was obviously just a few hours away from destroying the Ayatollahs. Okay? All they had to do was keep bombing, to bomb the installation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And the Iranian people, when they saw that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard had been defeated, or at least seriously weakened, they would have risen up and taken up they just tried to do it. They just tried to do it now, right? So they would have done it under much better conditions, and it would have all been over. So it's obvious that Israel was only hours away. And of course, the CIA...
He said it in his last quote, tweets. He actually said that he saved them, the Ayatollah, because in the last attack that Israel was supposed to do, they were probably supposed to bring them down completely and to stop the Israelis.
Exactly. Israel was hours away from bringing down the Ayatollahs. And of course, the CIA knew that because the CIA has very good intelligence about Iran and about everywhere else. So they knew that in a few hours, everything was going to be lost for the Ayatollahs. And that's when Trump came in, dropped a few bombs, and then stopped the Israelis. He said, ceasefire. And that's what saved the Ayatollahs. So you don't need to be a genius. You only need to understand that if Aaron is beating out the crap out of Benjamin and you stop the fight, you're saving Benjamin. You're not helping Aaron.
You remember on the fourth or the fifth day, he did something before he controlled the narrative with the bombs. He spoke to the people of Tehran and he told all of them to leave the city because Israel is going to do something dramatic. And then millions of Iranians went out from the city instead of staying there and creating a revolution, an uprising, using the opportunity of the Aaron attacking Benjamin, right? So they left the city.
And another detail here, this is very important what you just said, because of course, Trump knows, he knows that Israel is not going to attack the civilian population of Iran. And we saw it in the 12-day war when they took out, these generals, high-level figures who were in different apartments.
Yeah,
the bomb
only bedroom.
Only the apartment of the guy they're trying to kill. Israel is almost supernaturally careful to protect civilians, okay? And Trump knows this. So when he tells the Iranians that they should evacuate because Israel is going to do something horrible, he knows he's lying, and therefore your point is very, very astute. He was trying to abolish the conditions that might produce a revolution that would remove the Ayatollahs.
Yes. Now let's increase the how do you call it, the spectrum a
the
little
scope.
more, the scope. Thank you. And let's see what Trump did with Hezbollah and with Gaza, and especially with Qatar, who are the people who are basically responsible for the attack on 7th of October. So can you connect the puzzle for the audience to
Sure.
see?
Actually, I have a PowerPoint that can be useful here because I can show it to you with maps if I can share my screen.
I will try to see.
I can do it. I have the button to do it.
Please do.
Okay. Let me just pull up the PowerPoint first. Okay.
Guys, it's very important for you to support the work of Francisco Gil-White. This gentleman is doing for us more than we are doing for ourselves. So support his work, read his books. Actually, your books are mostly in Spanish, but read his webpage and Substack account that has incredible articles.
Okay, I found it. Thank you for that commercial. So here we go. So I'm sharing my screen now.
I'm not seeing anything yet.
No. I'm about to do it. Hold on. Hold on.
Okay.
Here we go. You can see it now, right?
Yes, now I can see it.
All right, so that's Israel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around Israel's borders so that you can see what Trump did on each border. Okay. So first, let's take Lebanon. All right. So what did he do in Lebanon? He followed a policy that is a continuation of the policy of previous presidents, which is to send a lot of money to the Lebanese armed forces, the LAF. Okay. Since 2006, the U.S. has sent more than $3 billion to the Lebanese armed forces. Okay. Now, any idiot who spends 5 minutes looking into this knows that the Lebanese armed forces are controlled by Hezbollah. Okay. So we've seen Hezbollah even showing off, U.S. equipment that was sent to the Lebanese armed forces, and they've operated together You can't have the Lebanese armed forces don't ever go into areas that Hezbollah forbids. It's very obvious that Hezbollah controls the Lebanese armed forces, and it's been like this for a long time, right? So when the U.S. sends weapons to the Lebanese armed forces, it is sending them to Hezbollah. Now, Trump is doing the same thing. He's just approved more money for the Lebanese armed forces, but he did more than that. When after the beeper operation, the beeper walkie-talkie operation, and the operation to destroy Nasrallah's bunker with the leadership of Hezbollah, Israel invaded Lebanon and was liberating all of Lebanon. They were destroying Hezbollah at an amazing speed. I have an article from somebody at West Point expressing complete and utter amazement at the total collapse of Hezbollah before the Israeli onslaught. And this was obviously not an attractive result to Trump, because he jumped to stop the Israelis. He sent his he can't force Netanyahu to stop, right? Because Netanyahu could have disobeyed, but this is the structure. Trump gives an order and Netanyahu obeys. So Trump told Netanyahu to stop in Lebanon, and Netanyahu did. And then he sent Tom Barak, his negotiator, and Tom Barak worked out an agreement where all that Lebanon has to do, all that the Lebanese government has to do, is produce a piece of paper that promises to disarm Hezbollah, which is what they always promise and never do. So the Lebanese government produced that worthless piece of paper, and Tom Barak then turned over to the Israelis and said, well, the Lebanese have done their part. Now it's your turn to get out of Lebanon in exchange for a piece of paper.
Remind me, please, he did that when he was president-elect and not yet fully president, right? Biden was still the president.
No. This is 2025. He was already president. What Trump did before he became president was force the Israelis to stop in Gaza.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So anyway, this is Lebanon. We'll talk about Gaza in a second. So that's the agreement. Israel has to get out of Lebanon, and Lebanon has to produce a piece of paper. And now more than $3 billion in U.S. weapons. Okay. So clearly what Trump did in Lebanon was protect Hezbollah and rearm Hezbollah. That's what he did. Okay, what about Syria? Okay, wow. I want us to think about Syria and Turkey together, okay? Because this is in Spanish. That's why you have the
no problem. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think of them together because Turkey is the sponsor of the new government in Syria, okay? So we have to think about those together. So the Trump administration stopped Netanyahu in Syria. So the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, were moving very fast through Syria because Syria was a mess. Al-Jolani, the new government, the new ruler of Syria, was able to get all the way to Damascus from Idlib, where he was before. So Idlib is, let me show you. Idlib is, oh, I'm sorry, that's not it. Forgive me. I always screw this up. Here we go. Highlighter and this guy. Okay, so Idlib is somewhere here, right? More or less. Yeah. That's where the province of Idlib is. And so he went all the way down to Damascus is over here, I think, more or less.
In 3 days, I think.
Yeah, very quickly. Why could he go there so fast? Because Hezbollah moved its positions from where they were keeping Al-Jolani penned right there on the border with Turkey because they were getting their heads cut off in Lebanon. And Israel was also bombing Syria. So they moved positions and they also sent people into Lebanon to help. And so that's why Jolani could suddenly move all the way down to Damascus. But everything was chaos. And the IDF advanced from the south, supported by the Druze, and they could have continued to go all the way up from here right? So they could have gone all the way up to the northeast and join up with the Rojava Kurds. This area up here is Rojava. The Rojava Kurds are libertarians. They're democratic Muslims. They're a tremendous phenomenon, never before seen. They emancipated all of the Kurdish women who now have equal rights. They protect all the minorities. They believe in democratic government. They want to be Westerners. They want to be allies of Israel. So Israel could have, the Israeli Defense Forces could have just rushed all the way up to the north, joined with the Rojava Kurds in the north, supported by the Druze in the south, and all together they could have created a democratic Syria. They would have beaten the crap out of al-Jolani and everybody else. But what does Trump do? Trump forces Israel to halt its strikes on al-Jolani and forces them basically to recognize the al-Jolani government in Damascus, as Trump was also doing. Right? He went to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to shake al-Jolani's hand. There he is. Well, this guy is ISIS. He's an ISIS terrorist. This is what Trump is recognizing in Syria. This is what he stopped the Israelis to install in Syria, ISIS. Trump was supposed to be the big nemesis of ISIS.
But actually, America produced ISIS in the jailhouses in Iraq.
That is correct. We have a whole article to explain that. We'll put it in the description as well.
Yeah, one more thing, that the Kurdish, if we are talking about betrayal, America betrayed the Kurdish so many times already. So,
and they just did it again. Because the al-Jolani is now destroying the Kurds in northeast Syria. We're gonna have a show about that tomorrow on management of reality. We're gonna explain what they did to the Kurds. Because al-Jolani is now destroying the Kurds with the support of Donald Trump. That's what's going on. So Trump is normalizing relations with an ISIS regime in Syria. Okay, this guy al-Jolani, who's shaking Trump's hand, was sent by al-Baghdadi, the creator of ISIS, to create al-Qaeda in Syria, which is ISIS, because al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria is what became ISIS. Okay, and of course he's getting a lot of help from Erdogan. Al-Jolani is getting a lot of help from Erdogan, the ruler of Turkey, who is another jihadi, and Trump is very happy with Erdogan. He claims that Erdogan is doing a great job in Syria, and he's and what is Erdogan doing in Syria? He's helping put al-Jolani in power in Syria. That is what he's doing. And they're all together preparing the next attack against Israel from Syria. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And here is Trump promising more weapons to Erdogan, and in particular the F-35 that Erdogan wants, and that will contribute to destroying Israeli air superiority in the region. Okay?
Yes.
And this is all being done at the same time that Erdogan is threatening to attack Israel on behalf of the Arab Palestinians. He's been claiming that he's the true sovereign of Jerusalem because the Ottoman Empire, blah, blah, blah. And he's also saying that he's going to take it, and that he's going to help the Arab Palestinians and get involved and attack Israel. He's doing all of that at the same time that Trump is promising weapons for him. It's really quite obvious what's going on.
Yes.
Then you have Iraq and Iran. So I consider them together because ever since Bush Jr.'s invasion of Iraq, Iraq has become Iran's westernmost province. And again, any idiot who studies this question for 5 minutes will see it. It's quite public, actually. It's just it's not discussed in the CNN primetime shows that people see, but it's out there. This gets discussed by serious analysts of Iraq in the Western press all the time. Yeah. So Well, this is my explanation of the 12-day war, which helps us understand what the true relationship between the U.S. bosses and the Ayatollahs is. But we already talked about that, so I'm going to skip it. But I want to add one aspect, which is this: that when Trump dropped his bombs on Iran in the 12-day war, he tweeted, or rather on Truth Social, he wrote in all caps that any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. He threatened them. Now, the internal politics of Iran made unavoidable a military reply, because it becomes impossible to explain to your entire jihadi structure, which is made up of fanatics, right? You can see that they really are fanatics because they've been murdering tens of thousands of Iranians, right? So these people are true fanatics. How are the Ayatollahs going to explain to these fanatics that they're not replying to the military attack of the United States? Great Satan, right? They had to throw some missiles back, right? So they did that. They threw some missiles at U.S. positions in Iraq and in Qatar. And so Trump, after that happened, instead of replying with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight, he did exactly nothing. Zero, nada, zip.
And it was completely coordinated because the bases were already evacuated.
That's right. Iran was very polite about it. They let them know that the missiles were coming. So the installations were evacuated. Apparently nobody was hurt. But the most remarkable thing is that attack met the condition that Donald Trump set in his threat. He said that he would destroy the Ayatollahs if they dared to reply. Well, they replied. What did Donald Trump do? Nothing. Because if he had replied, then Israel could have replied as well. And then the Ayatollahs would have been destroyed. The only way to protect the Ayatollahs was to contain himself, despite the fact that they had replied and that he had threatened him, right? Yes. He had to break his own grammar in order to save the Ayatollahs. The entire sequence of events is completely absurd. It's completely ridiculous. But the U.S. bosses will pay the cost of being absurd and ridiculous if it is necessary to save the Ayatollahs. And that's how you know what the true relationship is.
So once again, we are aligning ourselves with your model that can basically predict exactly those kind of things.
Exactly. The model I defend has no problem explaining this event. It's only ridiculous if you think that Trump is in some way an ally of Israel and an enemy of the Ayatollahs. Now, this is just to show you that in academic circles, everybody understands that Iraq is a client state of Iran. Okay, everybody understands it. Iraq controls the militias, the Shia militias that control Iraqi politics. Okay, so Iraq is basically belongs to Iran, and therefore, if you send military assistance to Iraq, you're sending it to Iran. All right. And if this is known in academia, of course it's known in U.S. intelligence. Everybody knows this. But the U.S. government understands that ordinary U.S. citizens don't know this because it isn't discussed in the controlled mainstream media. So they have used the fiction that Iraq is supposedly independent of Iran in order to send, look at this, $642 billion for U.S. military operations in Iraq and $24 billion for training, equipment, and other services for Iraqi security forces. This is tremendous.
Wow.
And the public argument, you're going to love this, the public argument for sending all of this military support for Iraq, which is for Iran, is that Iraq is supposedly fighting ISIS. Don't you love that?
Yeah.
Don't you love that? Yeah. They created ISIS, as you correctly stated. We have an entire article showing how the U.S. created ISIS And by the way, that's mainstream. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Mother Jones, and many other publications explained how the U.S. government, the U.S. military basically created ISIS in Iraq, because ISIS is a product of the U.S. prison system and the way the U.S. prison system was run in Iraq. And it is all quite deliberate. And that's mainstream. So the U.S. created ISIS. They install ISIS in Syria. And at the same time, they pretend that Iraq is fighting ISIS so that they can send all kinds of money to Iraq that then goes to Iran.
Insane.
Insane.
At least they have very good sense of humor, which we...
Well, I know they're laughing at us. They're certainly laughing at us.
Yes.
Then you have Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi Arabia, most people don't know this, but Saudi Arabia is the biggest recipient of U.S. armament of any country on the planet.
More than Israel?
Yeah, more than any other country. No country gets more U.S. weapons than Saudi Arabia on the entire planet. And this has been going on for a long, long time. And what is Donald Trump doing? He's giving them even more weapons. $142 billion in weapons were announced. Okay, so he's and why is this important? Well, because Saudi Arabia is one of the main financiers of international jihadism. They've played that role for a very long time. Okay, they're enemies of Israel and they're preparing an attack against Israel. Then you have Egypt going around the clockwise. You have Egypt. Well,
that's a
Egypt,
very serious threat. Very serious threat.
Very, very serious threat. We know that Egypt has been armed by the United States ever since 1979 publicly, because Jimmy Carter basically forced Menachem Begin. Well, he didn't force him. I shouldn't say that, because Menachem Begin could have refused. But Jimmy Carter organized a peace deal, so-called peace deal, where the Israeli government would return the Sinai to Egypt in exchange for a piece of paper. A piece of paper that says that Egypt promises not to try to exterminate the Israelis again, and promises never to put military hardware on the Sinai desert. That's it, a promise.
Which they do.
They do.
The promise, yes.
Yeah, the pieces of paper are worthless. Land means something. Israel should have kept the land, because if you keep the Sinai, Egypt cannot attack you. Not very easily. And the most amazing thing here is that the 1979 agreement between Egypt and Israel gives back the Sinai after Egypt used the Sinai to try to exterminate the Israelis. Gamal Abdel Nasser announced that his goal was the extermination of the Israeli Jews before the war of 1967. He announced this in public. Okay?
Yeah.
You don't give that back. How can you give that back? These people are trying to kill your entire population. Okay? But they gave it back, and the US president, Jimmy Carter, began a tradition of rewarding the Egyptians for producing a worthless piece of paper with between 2/3 and 3/4 of the money that they sent to Israel. So just considering Egypt, you've almost already wiped out the supposed aid to Israel that the US government sends. You just have to consider one enemy, and you've already almost wiped out that aid. Okay. Okay, so this is the tradition. They give Egypt tons of money every year, which Egypt spends on its military. What is Trump doing? Well, Trump made sure that when he freezed foreign aid, he didn't freeze it for Egypt. Foreign aid for Egypt is sacred. And again, Egypt spends it almost entirely on its military. Okay? So Trump is continuing this policy. And also, Trump has not objected to the fact that Egypt is conducting, it put a lot of military hardware on the Sinai just now, and is conducting military exercises to prepare an invasion of Israel in the Sinai. And of course, Egypt has been allowing all kinds of stuff to flow through the tunnels that connect Gaza to Egypt. All of that are acts of war. They've been violating the peace treaty. They've been at war with Israel for a long time. And all that time, the U.S. presidents have been arming Egypt. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I would just like to remind our audience that Egypt don't really have enemies that require so much force and preparation. And also, it's very interesting to look on the west side of Egypt, on the border of Libya, which is not a very serious threat to Egypt. They are building huge ports, and it seems like the Navy there is practicing how to block the most narrow area of the Mediterranean Sea to be able to block all the products that are coming to Israel through the Mediterranean Sea.
I see. Interesting.
So if you will find out about the ports that they build there, it's incredible. 2 amazing, huge ports.
Interesting. I didn't know about that. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So anyway, so this is going on. Egypt is preparing an invasion of Israel, and Trump is fine with that. Completely fine with that. He's continuing the sales of weapons to Egypt. Then you've got Gaza. What happened in Gaza? As we were saying earlier, Trump managed to get the very ceasefire that Biden was demanding. He managed to get that done even before he was formally inaugurated as U.S. president. And then he again imposed a ceasefire just recently, right when the IDF was about to give Hamas the coup de grace in Gaza, okay? Because all they had left was Gaza City. They were now going to do the final operation to finally get rid of Hamas. And once again, Trump comes in at the last minute to make sure he saves Hamas, imposes a peace plan, a ceasefire and a peace plan. And I made my predictions immediately. I said that I predicted that the live hostages would be turned over, but that everything else in the agreement would be violated by Hamas. Why was I sure that the live hostages would be turned over? Because I knew that the treasonous Israeli government would respond with the other side of the agreement, which is to release the terrorists that murder innocent Israelis, right? I knew they would do that. So I knew that Hamas would want to get those terrorists, so they would release the hostages. And the other reason, the even more important reason, is that if Hamas did not release the live hostages, Trump would not be able to stop the Israelis. Okay? If the live hostages were not released, Israel would resume the war. So the only way to save Hamas was for Hamas to turn over the live hostages. So I predicted that given this grammar, that part of the agreement would be honored, but that everything else Hamas would violate. And everything happened according to my predictions. The live hostages were turned over. Israel released, I forget how many terrorists, and then Hamas systematically violated every single other item in the agreement. Even though that happened, Trump is against Israel resuming the war against Hamas. But not only that, once Hamas regained control of about half of Gaza, they started executing Arabs from the clans that had been fighting Hamas publicly in the streets with no trial, obviously, because the Hamas people are terrorists. And when that happened, Trump became a public apologist for Hamas, and he said that that was not a reason to resume the war against Hamas, because Hamas, according to him, was controlling a criminal element in Gaza. This is amazing. The criminal element in Gaza, of course, is Hamas. And they were conducting extrajudicial executions of people in the streets. This is what Trump defended as an allegedly legitimate police action by Hamas. I mean, if this doesn't make people wake up, I don't know what will. This is grammatically so clear.
Yes.
Then you have Qatar.
Before Qatar, what do you make
Yeah.
of the technocratic government that they are going to establish, and they are pushing the Turkish into Gaza? And
Right. Well, they're preparing the next attack against Israel, obviously. And that will be interpreted later as a mistake. Oh, Trump made a mistake. He should have never trusted the Turks. Oh my God, what a blunder, blah, blah, blah. That's how they will describe it. It's no blunder. They're doing this on purpose. They're preparing the next attack from Gaza. So the Turks are going to, if the Turks get in there, they will, of course, start arming, they will be the replacement for, in general, strategically, Turkey is the replacement of Iran. So Israel hurt Iran and the whole Iran axis so badly that this is why Trump then had al-Jolani become the new government in Syria, because it's very difficult now for Iran to be a good patron of the terrorists who are going to attack Israel from the north and from Gaza, because they're so badly hurt and Iran is collapsing. So when they saw that this was happening, that the IDF was beating the crap out of the Iranian axis, they shifted to a northern axis with Turkey as the patron of ISIS in Syria. And now they want to do the same thing in Gaza, because Turkey is very strong, and Turkey can be furnishing all kinds of weapons to the terrorists for the next attack against the Israeli Jews. You see, that's what they're doing.
About Iran, another reason for why he's not going to let them fall is because he wants to keep some kind of equilibrium between the Shia and the Sunni. So in the political grammar, he can convince the Americans that he have to sell weapons to the Sunni to basically protect themselves from the Shia. And so
this always switches. So they need the Sunni and the Shia, because one year they're convincing us that the U.S. must send weapons to the Sunni forces so that they can fight the scary Shia forces. And the next year, they convince us that they need to send weapons to the Shia forces so that they can fight the scary Sunni forces. They're always switching this. They obviously, people have no memory, and our powers of reasoning have been destroyed. So they keep telling us the same story. And meanwhile, they're arming both sides, and both sides are going to attack Israel.
I agree.
Okay, Qatar.
No.
So Qatar is an international financier of international jihadism, and it is the closest ally of the United States. When the most important overseas U.S. military base is in Qatar. It's not in Israel. It's in Qatar, a jihadi slave state. There are about 2 million slaves in Qatar. This is a jihadi slave state. When I say there's 2 million slaves in Qatar, this is not a metaphor. These are bona fide slaves. They have a master. They can't leave. They're not paid. They're physically and sexually abused. When they don't need them anymore, they throw them out in the street to die of hunger. That's Qatar, and that's where the U.S. chose to build its most important overseas military base. Qatar is the host of CENTCOM, Central Command.
Yeah, 10,000 soldiers.
Yeah, and that's the state. Qatar is the state that attacked Israel on October 7th, because Qatar is one of the sugar daddies of Hamas. Okay, the other one is Iran. So that's what the U.S. government is protecting. This is the area of responsibility of Central Command of CENTCOM, located in Qatar. Just look at that. North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. That's the area of responsibility. This is the most important overseas military structure of the United States. And of course, we've seen Trump give Qatar notice of the incoming Israeli attack. And then he made a giant tantrum when Israel did that, when Israel tried to kill a few Hamas leaders that Qatar was protecting. And then he had Netanyahu apologize to the emir of Qatar. I mean,
it's a show, because Netanyahu, according to everything that we learned tonight, is basically working for the Americans. So it's all
of course, but even so, internal pressure in Israel forces Netanyahu to do some things that are pro-Israel, right? So yeah, but it's a it's a show, but sometimes Netanyahu is forced to order the IDF to do things that are in the interest of Israel.
And it allowed the Americans to extend NATO protection to Qatar. That's the gift that they received by our planned attack.
No. It has nothing to do with Israel. Trump could have extended NATO protection to Qatar at any moment. The reason he did that is to make it very clear that Israel cannot mess with Qatar ever again. Okay, so if Israel ever dares to attack Qatar, it'll be messing with the United States. That's what Trump said. So he extended NATO protection to Qatar, and he had Netanyahu apologize to the butcher of the Israeli Jews on October 7th, because Qatar is the state that attacked Israel on October 7th. This is what the U.S. is doing, and Trump is going to, according to what Pete Hegseth announced, they're going to be training the Qatari Air Force in Idaho.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The Kaplan riots, the left, the extreme left in the streets during the time of the hostages going out, calling for Bibi to fall, and all the rest of it is obviously sponsored by the CIA. It's some kind of a color revolution. And this is another charade, because why would they try to bring down this double agent that does all those things? So what
you're absolutely right. It's a charade. It's a charade. They're not really trying to bring down the Netanyahu government. What they're doing is they're trying to create a civil war in Israel. That's what they're trying to do. So they're trying to produce two camps that hate each other so much that they can't live with each other and might take up arms against each other. And my theory of what the entire plan was is, because if you remember, on October 6th, 2023, it seemed like Israel was on the brink of civil war, right?
Yes.
And I think they were hoping for that because the minute that started, they were all going to attack. And they thought that the Hamas attack would produce that civil war, because the original plan, in my view, was not to kill that many people. It was to take a lot of hostages and then say, we won't give them back unless all of the terrorists are released from Israeli jails. And that demand would have split Israel exactly down the middle, and the people defending the Supreme Court would have said, yeah, give them all the terrorists, and the people attacking the Supreme Court would have said, never. And those two camps that were already at loggerheads would now have started a civil war. That's what they were hoping for. But the Hamas terrorists went off script, and they killed so many Israelis and so horribly that the attack had the effect of uniting the Israelis. And so the other enemies that were ready to join the attack all together, the minute that Israel plunged into civil war, they were like, oh damn, that didn't happen. They're united. And so they waited, and that is what allowed Israel to defend itself at that juncture.
Yes. And what do you make about the initiative of the Abraham Accords and all this?
That's another show. That's another show. In the Muslim culture, in Islamic jurisprudence, there is a principle called taqiyya. Taqiyya means that you can lie to infidels. You can sign agreements with infidels, knowing that you're going to break them beforehand. Okay, so why can you lie to infidels? Well, because you're going to go kill them anyway, right? That's what jihad is about. It's about killing infidels who don't want to convert to Islam. If you're going to kill them anyway, obviously you can lie to them. So that's what the principle of taqiyya is. And obviously what it means in practical terms for people who are deciding Israeli foreign policy is that you cannot sign any agreement with Muslims. It makes no sense. Why would you do it? Yeah. If they're allowed to lie to you, then signing agreements with them is to give them a strategic advantage. And what happened with the Abraham Accords is that Emirates, for example, and I think Sudan, they're all, Sudan is getting for a promise to sign, because they haven't signed, they're getting economic help. And Emirates is getting weapons. It's going to get U.S. weapons for signing the Abraham Accords. Emirates is another jihadi state, right? So the outcome of the Abraham Accords is to produce a false sense of security, which hurts Israeli readiness, and also to generate a grammatical argument for the enemies of Israel to get U.S. weapons, which is what's happening. So anyway, those are the and then we have to talk about Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria is run by Al-Fatah, which, as we said earlier, is the continuation of the German Nazi final solution. And those guys are inside Israel. And they're planning their next attack. They have a pay-for-slay program. It's a huge chunk of the Palestinian Authority budget goes to paying any Arab who's killed a Jew or died trying. The Israelis must defend themselves. They must stop believing anyone who tells them that they should make peace with these forces. They should stop believing the U.S. government, and they should elect Moshe Feiglin. There is no one else saying the right things in Israel, and there is no one else who has the track record of consistent patriotism, a proven track record of consistent patriotism, and a track record that shows that he is incorruptible. Nobody else is available to the Israeli citizenry.
You know that they are not going to allow him. They are not going to allow him.
Well, look,
they're going to push him out. And because the people are so uneducated and they only watch the media and being, receiving all this propaganda, they just simply don't know the scale.
But you can change this. You can change this. You can start to change this. We're going to make this video famous, and Israelis are going to share it with each other, and they're going to start to understand how the world works, and then they're going to realize that the leadership is rotten, and that the one guy who's always been consistently defending them is Moshe Feiglin. And that makes it possible for him to win. But we have to communicate with Israelis. The change we need cannot happen until after people understand what world they actually live in. Once they understand that their reality has been managed, and they come into contact with a model that does explain the world, and that makes sense of the behavior of the U.S. presidents, including Donald Trump, they've all been perfectly consistent, then you can begin to defend the state of Israel. And I'll tell you something else. In order for the state of Israel to be destroyed, they really do have to manage reality. Because if all Westerners understood what they're doing, they could have never built up support for the destruction of Israel the way they have. And still, many, many, many Westerners still support Israel. It's just that the media wants you to think that support for Israel has been collapsing. But many, many Westerners support Israel. There's a lot of support among Christian Zionists and also many, many secular Westerners. And if this model that we have been describing can be communicated to them, and they understand the world that we live in, they will be very upset at what the Western leaders have been doing to prepare the next genocide in Israel. So they really need to manage our reality, which means that if this can be explained, and we have the tools to do it, we have the technologies. YouTube, the tool we're using now, is one of these tools that we can use to communicate with all Westerners and all Israelis. This couldn't have been done before. We didn't have the tools to communicate with everybody, but now we have them. We must use them before we lose all control of them. The time is running out. But there is an opportunity. It's not hopeless. We can do this. It's just that people need to realize that, especially the Jews need to realize that they have to spend their money now defending themselves, because in another 15 minutes, they're going to come take their money away, and then they're going to kill them. So the money that the Jewish community has now, which is not a little, and we don't need that much money. It needs to be spent now in a communication effort to explain first to all Israelis, then to all Jews, and then to all Westerners what is actually going on. And if we can enlighten everybody, then the system does stop. They can only do this if they are managing our reality and we don't understand what they're doing.
I agree, absolutely agree. Another thing that people here have to understand is that we must be independent militaristically wise and develop our own weapons, and also understand that in a war, we actually have to win. We have to submit the enemy completely. And I would like to ask you, there is always this separation between Hamas and the people of Gaza. And to me, it's very stupid. The people of Gaza are Hamas. What are your thoughts about that? And how do you explain that, if you agree with me, to the rest of the world who think that we are genociding the people there?
Well, I mean, whether or not you make a distinction between the people of Gaza and Hamas, the Israeli Defense Forces have not been committing genocide. I mean, that's just an objective fact. The IDF has the best track record of protecting enemy civilians of any army in the history of warfare. So that's just not, it's just media nonsense that they produce in order to destroy the good image of Israel. But do I make a distinction between the people of Gaza and Hamas? I do, because the people of Gaza have been indoctrinated by this terrorist organization. And we must make a distinction between the people responsible for producing the indoctrination and the victims of the indoctrination. Now, does this mean that most of the people of Gaza are people that you can make peace with? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that, because they have been indoctrinated, and a great many of them have been turned into monsters, right? So the people of Gaza actually voted for Hamas. They elected Hamas. It was a strong majority that elected Hamas. And when polls are conducted in Gaza, I think upwards of 80% of the people in Gaza say they support Hamas and they support terrorism against Israelis. So I think it's important as human beings to recognize that there are processes of indoctrination that victimize people, and the people of Gaza have been victimized by a terrorist organization. Now, Hamas is not the only responsible party here. The government of Israel is responsible for the destruction of the Arab Palestinians in Gaza, because the government of Israel allowed PLO Fatah into Israel, and PLO Fatah then gave Gaza to Hamas. And when PLO Fatah gave Gaza to Hamas, the Israeli government should have reinvaded Gaza, because there was never an agreement to give Gaza to Hamas. The agreement was to give Gaza to PLO Fatah. PLO Fatah didn't. If PLO.
Did they give it to Hamas? I thought there was a civil war between them and
no, that was a show. That was a show. We have an article to explain that as well. That was a show. They pretended to fight. Look, it's very simple to explain. The ratio of fighters, the PLO Fatah to Hamas, the ratio was 11-1 in fighters. Hamas had almost no weapons at that time. PLO Fatah had several fortifications that were impregnable. There was just no way that PLO Fatah could lose that fight. There was a Daily Telegraph reporter on the ground. They didn't let him publish this piece, but he published it in his blog. He explained that he was interviewing the Fatah fighters, and the PLO Fatah fighters told him that they were ordered not to fight. They were very upset.
Incredible.
Very upset. So lots of people are responsible for the destruction of the Arab Palestinians. We should feel compassion for them, because the process of indoctrination by a terrorist movement destroys people, and they have been destroyed. And that terrorist indoctrination was imposed on them. So we should feel compassion for them. But that doesn't mean that Israelis can live in peace with them, because they have been destroyed. There are only two possibilities for Gaza. One is to expel them all. And frankly, I think that's the best thing for the Israeli Jews, to move these people somewhere else. Now, it's still a tragedy for the Arab Palestinians whose minds were destroyed, but you know, the Israeli Jews cannot be made to live beside people who want to exterminate the Israeli Jews. That's just not, it's just not acceptable. So they should be, I think the best thing is for them to be removed. Now, where, I don't know, but they should be removed. The second best option is for Israel to take control of all of the institutions of the Arab Palestinians after Hamas has been completely destroyed.
And deprogram the population.
And Israel should completely occupy Gaza and control all of the institutions, and any Arab Palestinian that gives the slightest trouble should be expelled. That's the second best option. But under no circumstances should the Arab Palestinians be allowed to govern themselves, because you will get another terrorist attack. I think one or perhaps two generations need to go by before the Arab Palestinians, before the experiment of self-government in Gaza can even be contemplated, because their minds have been completely poisoned. And one cannot ask the Israeli Jews to live next to people who, or to allow people who want to exterminate them to have any kind of power. That's just not acceptable.
Yeah, we have to deprogram their minds. Many people don't recognize that we are dealing here with a religious war. It's not necessarily a war between nations or their claim for sovereignty or something like that. And according to Islam, once you occupy a certain land, and this land called Israel was under Islam for many hundreds of years. So it seems to me like there is no end to that, as long as they remain.
No, they will not stop. Israel has to win. There is no agreement possible. Agreements are impossible. This is a religious war. They mean to kill every last living Jew. That's their mission, and they will not stop. They will not stop. And if they sign agreements, they will violate them. Israel has to win. That's the only path forward. Israel has to win, and every time it wins, it has to keep the territory. This is Moshe Feigelin's policy. It's also what I recommend. It's the only path forward.
I understand. We are towards the end. Maybe 5 more minutes, if I may. It will be okay? I know you must be tired.
5 minutes, because I'm feeling a little bit tired. We really have to go.
Of course. Thank you so much for the time
you
gave me. About Iran, I would like to know what you think that will eventually happen, because Trump is still sending a lot of weapons and armaments, and is building up the army here. And my worry is that if I take your model very seriously, and I do, there are like several possibilities here. And one of them is to sacrifice the jihadists in Iran against what he did until now, to the point where maybe they have nuclear weapons that they will use against us, and destroy Israel, as you claim that eventually all of them want to do, or they are going to send so many missiles and create so much devastation that Egypt and other countries in the region, like you showed on the map, will use this opportunity to facilitate an attack. So what do you think is the...
I think you've got this right. The prediction I made in 2006 was that the only condition under which the U.S. would ever attack Iran is if this was bad for Israel. And that's exactly what happened. The U.S. presidents have been protecting Iran, but they did attack Iran in the 12-day war. And the way they attacked Iran was so that they could save the Ayatollahs for a future attack on Israel. That's what they did. So the condition I stipulated is exactly what happened. And if they do attack Iran again, they will try to make it bad for Israel. That because they're trying to destroy Israel. This is what the U.S. presidents do.
My good sir, kindly tell my audience where they can find your work and support you in great details. I want them to know everything that you are producing.
Well, it's on the screen, franciscogilwhite.com. This is the hub. You can go there to all of our different kinds of content. You can go to my books, my articles, our YouTube channels. We have an English language YouTube channel. We have a Spanish language YouTube channel. They both have a lot of content. We have documentaries. We have a documentary on Husseini. We have a documentary on the creation of Iran by PLO Fatah. We have a documentary on who are the Palestinians historically. Where does that idea come from? How did they make that up, and so forth. And we can put all of those in the description if you want. I will give you all of the materials so that you can put that there. But the FranciscoGil-White.com is the hub. It gives them access to everything. I encourage people to subscribe themselves because we're producing new content all the time. And the way to stay informed and understand the world better is to keep up with our publications. And there's really a lot of material on the Substack site, the article site, and it is designed so that you can start with any article at all. They're self-contained, but each article points you, as you know, because you've been reading a lot, it points you to other aspects of the context that you need so that you can understand the article you're reading better. So it doesn't matter where you start, it'll soon end up taking you everywhere, and you will be able to put the model together in your mind just by reading enough articles.
Yes. My friend, I would like to thank you with all my heart for your hard work, your ability to articulate these amazing topics that are, basically this is an awakening call for our people to basically survive. So your work is highly appreciated, and I thank you very, very much. Thank you for this time also.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.